All right. Thanks again, everyone, for joining. My name is Chad Bowling. I am the broadband manager at the Wyoming Business Council, and with us as part of our staff, joining us today with CTC, we have Morgan Barnes, Mitch Herget, and Patty Campbell, who will help us present today. This meeting will be recorded and it will be posted to our website most likely by the end of the day today, along with the slides we'll be reviewing. We will be giving everyone an opportunity to, as part of a Q&A, please ask your questions in the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen, and we will go through each and every one of them at the end of the call. With that being said, Mitch, I will kick it off to you and we will get into it.
Thank you, Chad. Appreciate it. And good morning, everybody. A pleasure to be here. Some of you have seen me a lot over the last couple of weeks. This is a follow-on to our previous several presentations that we've done. Today, we're going to be touching on the BEAD milestone process, how it differs from what some of you may be familiar with in previous programs like the CPF program here in Wyoming. We'll also be talking about a few other program obligations, including reporting and a few other things as well. So as we move into the next slide, I'll do a quick overview here, which is where we are in the project timeline. So we are now in the process of hopefully getting contracts moving and awarded. So March to May timeline, we're really hoping to get everyone wrapped up, ideally in this next month. I think our drop dead date for everything to be done and dusted is May 18th. But again, looking to keep us from sweating a little bit and making sure that we're getting these contracts moved through the process relatively quickly. While you're working on those, we are doing the technical assistance. This is presentation 3, I guess, of several that we're going to be doing. I'll touch on kind of all of those moving forward. But we are well underway. We're really looking forward to get this program started. It's been a long time coming. We've done it. We liked it so much. We've done it twice at this point. Hopefully this is the last time we have to run a BEAD specific program with you all here. Moving on to the next slide. Again, I mentioned we're going to go over the milestone process, the overview of it. I'm going to talk specifically about the project plan milestone, which is the first one that you'll be working on, why that's important, how that helps you move into the remainder of the work that you're going to be doing. Then I'll turn it over to my colleague, Patty, who will talk a little bit about program required reporting requirements, as well as some of the post-award requirements that are needed as well to make sure we have all those buttoned up. All right, so milestone overview, and stop me if you've heard this one before. Before we get into the individual milestones, what I really wanted to talk about was understanding the fixed amount subaward. So one of the things that NTIA did for this program was allow states to use fixed amount of subawards. This was recommended by them. The state is using a fixed amount of subaward for all of the engagements with you here. The positive part of this is payments are based on actual work that you're done, not tied to expenses incurred. So hopefully a lot of the focus will be on getting the project actually done, not working on the amount of accounting that you may be accustomed to with the CPF program and some of the ones you've worked on in the past. NTIA released some guidance on several mechanisms for how this payment structure and a fixed amount of subaward would work. One of them include paying you all of the money at the very end when you got 100% completion. One of them is paying you percentage of the money when you got all the way to in for percentages of the project. And then the other was setting objectives or milestones so that you can get paid for meeting specific broadband deployment activities along the way. WBO has created milestones that align with broadband deployment generally to help make sure that you have that cash flow going for you. You don't have to wait to the end to get your federal dollars. So we're hoping that will reduce the burden on you greatly and kind of align with what you're expecting to see. Further, we want to allow you some flexibility in how you go about structuring your project so that you can maximize your cash flow, your flexibility on how you do this. We'll talk about in a couple slides down the line how you are able to develop your own project phases that sort of tie to these milestone threshold categories as well as individual items so that you can get paid in a timely manner that's efficient and helps you complete your program to the best of your abilities. With that said, there are some program requirements that we have to abide by when we do fixed amount subaward. This means that we must reimburse you according to the objectives met, not some sort of facsimile of or not some different milestone. Once these milestones are set, we have to abide by those. Additionally, we can't reimburse funds upfront before the milestones are met. And then on the good side, again, you are not required to give us thousands and thousands of invoices for us to comb through and make sure are right or wrong like we've done in CPF program previously. Instead, we're going to be asking for some specific technical documentation, which most of you have provided to us in CPF anyway if you worked on those programs, and generally stuff that you generate through your normal activities anyway. And I'll touch about what those are as we move into subsequent slides. And so one of the things I want to touch on is sort of balancing the obligations. We have the program requirements that I touched about that NTIA want us to do. We have Wyoming broadband offices obligations to be good stewards of the federal money, to make sure that we are accountable to the stakeholders and to the federal government as well. And we have your flexibility and your ability to get your job done the way you would like to do. And we balance all of those things when we developed what our milestones are. We really wanted to give you the maximum amount of flexibility to do this your way while meeting the needs of the broadband office and NTIA. And thus we settled on the following milestones. Or should I say milestone categories. They may look familiar to a lot of you. This should be included in some of the previous documentation that we've disseminated through either the draft contract or your individual contracts with your information in it. This should not look too different from you, but we've settled on for terrestrial projects, 5% of your total award amount in project plan. We have 10% in engineering and permitting. We have 15 in the pre-deployment activities, 60% in deployment of the actual network where the bulk of the cost is, and then network activation and closeout is the final 10%, adding up to 100. I'll talk about these categories in more detail as we move forward, and it reminds me that when questions do come up, if I can get to them, I will. If I can't see them, then ultimately I will make sure we touch on all of them at the end of the webinar, and then anything we can't answer fully, we will put into an FAQ that gets published on the website as well. Additionally, in Wyoming, going back a slide, sorry, I paused there for a second, but we also have some milestones for LEO. We'll put additional guidance out for what that looks like as well. This is in line with a lot of the milestones that other states across the country are doing for them as well. But again, we can touch on that later. So yeah, thank you. All right, so I mentioned we have these categories, but when you looked at your contract, there may be a level of detail further. What we wanted to do is give you these individual milestone thresholds that allow you to get paid in a much more timely manner. So if you're able to define or to achieve engineering and permitting, pre-deployment activities, deployment for a subset of your defined BSLs that you're obligated to, you're eligible for portions of that funding. So we want to, again, maximize the way that you're able to get paid, so you're not holding up or waiting for funds from the state while you move through your project. This flexibility is optional to you. If you have a very small project that you're going to knock out in one short build season and you don't want to break your project into multiple phases to get paid quicker because it's all happening at the same time, you don't have to do that. But we wanted to make sure for the larger projects that we have the ability to make sure that we are incentivizing you or getting you disbursement payment on a timely manner, along with the cost that you're incurring, thinking through all the real world parameters that you're going to have to deal with. So a good example is when you are developing your project phasing, when you're requesting reimbursement, and I'll clarify that in a second, but if you are, say you're the deployment phase and you have a submission or a phase that is 37% of the BSLs that have meet all the submission obligations to achieve that milestone, you're eligible, you've exceeded the 20% threshold, you're eligible to get that amount of money. When you're designing your phases, you may want to think about what those thresholds are in terms of BSLs so that you can maximize the cash flow into you. So if you have a submission that represents 62% of your project BSLs, you're eligible for 60%. So think about those thresholds when you are aligning your phases in the real world. I'm using the word reimbursement, and I think I'll take a step back before we move on. This is with fixed amount of subawards, you receive a disbursement. NTA is language that sort of kind of uses both interchangeably. So we're using reimbursement here to align with the guidance that they've given us. But I want to be very clear. Your disbursement is for achieving goals. It's not tied to your actual expenditures, which you would be reimbursed. You achieve a milestone. We disperse an amount of money, which is a percentage based on your total contract amount. I'll talk about that a little bit later on, but in your mind, I want you to make sure you understand that expenses and reimbursement are separate from what we're doing here in this milestone, which is disbursement. One of the things I mentioned is, avoiding having to have all these expenses come into us going through all of this. So we don't need that documentation. This should, in theory, greatly reduce the burden on your team, your accounting team, of what you have to supply to us. Conversely, we do need some information from you through each of these milestone process, which will give us an understanding that you've met the technical objective for those, whether that's your project plan, your engineering and permitting work, your pre-deployment, deployment, network activation. So for each of these individual milestones, for each phase that you break your project down for each of these milestones, there's a series of documents that we're going to require you to submit to us so that we can understand that you've met those goals and approved disbursement. What we have here is, again, each of the columns represent an individual milestone. You'll give us a submission of that document that covers your phase or your BSLs specifically tied to that allows us to do an analysis that you've met your commitment, and then we'll disperse payment to you relatively quickly. Many of these documents have been templatized to further kind of lessen the burden on you. We wanted to make this simple. A lot of them are going to look similar to some of those templates that you did during your application phase. If you were able to get through that phase, which if you're on this call, you have got through that phase, then this shouldn't be much more of a burden to you than what was there. A lot of these documents are designed to be living documents. So good example, like the bill of materials, you may submit that early on in the engineering and permitting phase to identify to us that you have identified all the materials that you're going to need for your project. As you get into pre-deployment and you're proving that you have procured materials, you have staged things successfully, you'll use that same tracker to update information to us that will allow us to understand what you've procured, what you've staged. Also, as you get into deployment and network activation as well, you can identify what has been put in the ground, so it all kind of ties together. We're not asking you to invent separate documents as you continue forward. These documents will be living from the beginning to the end and kind of follow you through life, again, with the idea that it will ease the burden. We learned a lot of lessons through the Connect Wyoming CPF program. And what we've tried to do is, for all of those instances that came up and then required us to do some different approaches, we tried to build all of those into this BEAD program to, again, ease the burden on you as the provider. I just want to touch quickly on the LEO milestones. There'll be additional guidance on that as we move forward, but this is pretty standard with what a lot of the states are doing as far as milestones for LEO submission and part of that process. But that will be clearly outlined in the program guide that gets released soon. All right, let's talk a little bit about the project plan milestone. I talked about the milestones and how they lay out all of the work that we're going to be doing. So each of these are individual documents. So in the project plan milestone, we had a very specific column of what's required. One of the things that we want to do is get a location list from you. You have a location list that you'll have signed during your contract. This will be a living document that we move through each of the milestones. One of the things that you're able to do in the project plan phase is define, or project plan milestone rather, is what you're going to be doing in the individual phases. It allows you to build a phase that encompasses a level of BSLs in your project, infrastructure associated with those BSLs, and essentially build out what your network is going to be like in increments of BSLs. And so part of you identifying, part of the submission for project plan is tying those required BSLs that you'll be working on into specific phases, so that we understand when you submit phase 1 and 2, it should equal these specific BSLs in your program. We look against what percentage that is on the total, and if it's over 20%, you get 20% of the funds throughout the life of the program as well. So moving on to the next item here, EHP questionnaire. All of you should have this in hand to date. We are treating this as part of one of the deliverables for the project plan milestone, but it doesn't need to mean you wait. until we get to this milestone before you submit it. One of the reasons we wanted to get this in your hands now is the sooner we get this back from you, the sooner we can initiate and move forward with the EHP process. One of the things that we believe here is that in order to have a proper project plan, you have had to have thought through all of these things as well. So we are expecting to see the questionnaire back from you as soon as possible. Some of you have already submitted this back to us, which is fantastic. But as part of a successful project plan submission, having a copy of this resubmitted so we know that you have gotten through this part of the phase is really important to us. Project timeline, similar. It's again templated to make it easier. If you've done the project timeline as part of your application, it shouldn't be much more difficult. What we've done here is give you the ability to, at a high level, not tied to milestones, but tied to specific activities that you're working on, define what your overall project is going to look like by activity for 4 years. We've also, if you're taking advantage of this project phasing approach, you can kind of replicate what individual phase items are going to be across your project. So you would take phase one and multiply that a couple times across the various phases that you're going to do your project in. So it gives us granularity of your project plan of when you're going to implement some of these things across the next 4 years. Additionally, we have a tab which allows you to show us your anticipated month in which you're going to want to request disbursement from the state. This will kind of help us plan and make sure that we are fully allocated and staffed to quickly turn around these things. We know that project timelines will change as you get into the real world. Permitting locates, all these other factors will impact how your project is. We see this as a living document, and as you have changes to your schedule, you'll be able to update this and provide it to us. So we'll be tracking when we expect to see your individual disbursement, but we'll also be tracking to see how your project is going along what you've anticipated so far. That will help us make sure that we are being responsive to you and helping alleviate any needs you have. In each of these documents, I do want to point out that there will be a tab for instructions. And so that should be very clear on what we're expecting in each of these documents through that instructions tab. As I mentioned previously, there will be a large program guide that speaks to each of these milestones, what we're expecting to see in detail. So there's paragraphs written on what should be filled out and what should be submitted. We're always happy to support with additional TA to make sure you get what you need. And of course, like you would remember in ARPA, we're happy to go through the curating process to make sure we get the right documents so that we can get disbursement out to you as quickly and efficiently as possible. Moving on, talking about design shape files. Everyone submitted design shape files at the, as part of your application. What we'd be looking for in the project plan is, again, if you are taking advantage of phasing, you would break out the portions of your proposed project, the BSLs, the infrastructure that you're intending to build. You would put those in individual phases so we understand what your approach is going to be, and we can best help you as we move forward into the subsequent milestones. When you are submitting engineering for phases 1 and 2, we'll make sure that we understand what we're looking at from a design because you've helped articulate it during this project plan phase. And as you move forward with shape files, this is like a living document as well. We expect you have a basic routes now because you haven't done your engineering. We expect as you finish your project plan, you'll have added phasing to that as applicable as you desire. And then as you move into through the engineering phase, you'll be able to add attribution to your design, which is where are the handholds going to be? Where are the, is it aerial? Is it underground? Are you using, this type of cable? Are you using a different approach? You'll continue to iterate on the granularity that will help us move through the process and quickly, again, prove disbursement as we move through the program. Permit status summary, same thing. This is a living document throughout. What we're hoping to get in the project plan milestone is we want you to identify all of the permits that you've identified that you're going to need for the program. We want you to break it out by project phase. So when you get into the submission of phase 1 and phase 2 engineering, we want to make sure that you have appropriately obtained the permits for those phases. We know that you may not know all of the permits you're going to get right away because through the engineering process, you typically find a few that you may not have anticipated. That's why this is a living document. But part of what we want to see in the permit status summary from the project plan milestone is that you've identified all the permits you're expecting that you're going to need to obtain and what those statuses are. And then we'll move through this with you as we get through engineering and construction. We'll just identify that you have obtained all the permits that you have needed throughout. This is very similar to what we've been asking for in Connect Wyoming CPF program. And we're just trying to make it easy and give you information up front so you're not having to do a lot of this retroactively throughout the project, which should, again, hopefully reduce your burden. One of the other things that we need in this project plan milestone is just some certification from you, some attesting that you have a plan in place to track your evidence of your expense tracking, your match obligation, and you have the proper record retention in. This is sort of a one-time thing that we need you to certify and approve so that we can move forward with the rest of the milestones. But again, part of the federal obligation is that you have these in place. We are trying to make this simple from our perspective and making sure that you attest to having these things, and then we can move forward and make sure we provide disbursement and oversight as needed. One of the things that we need to do also in a little more detail, but not too much detail, is track your evidence of match obligation. And so we do not want to look at all your individual invoices. We do not want that level of detail to come into the state. But what we do need from you is clarification on how you are tracking your expenses to date, as well as your match obligation that you have to the NTIA in this program. Some of you in the minimum match in non-high cost areas is 25%. And so as we move through this part of quarterly reporting, we'll ask you to tell us what your total expense amounts, how much of your match have you put up as well, and some certification that identifies that you have officially complied with this. We don't want to get into the weeds. We just want you to certify that you're in compliance here. It's also required by NTIA to get this during each of the milestone submissions, so that's why it's coming up here as well. We fully expect that maybe for the project plan milestone, you may have not expended all of your match, right? You're getting 5% for developing this project plan. There's a real chance that you may not have expended 25% of the match when you get this money. That is okay. I think what NTIA is really looking for is that we articulate a plan to make sure we are complying with match throughout the life of the program. There may be some submit milestones. There may be some quarters where we're slightly behind the match requirements for them, but as long as we can articulate to the NTIA that we have a plan to make sure we're expending the match on average at a clip that is in line with this kind of proration of what the match average should be, they'll be satisfied by that. So this is just another tool that we are obligated to do and need to use to make sure that we are getting clarity from you on where things stand. Fixed wireless design. So a few of you have fixed wireless projects. Instead of adding extra details to the shape files that we're looking at, it's a little different. If you're on this call and you have a fixed wireless program, project rather, or award, you're fully aware of this fixed wireless design template. You know it, you love it, and you've successfully been able to fill it out for us if you're on this call, meaning that you've got through the application phase. Is very similar to what we've done there. This is, again, a part of the living design document for fixed wireless, just an additional thing for those hybrid projects or so fully fixed wireless projects. We want to make sure we're getting this information from you throughout the life of the project. There may not be major changes from what you submitted in your application, that we approved from this template to what you provide in your project plan, as long as nothing has changed from you. As you get through engineering phase and the heights change and the equipment change, we want these things to be updated. We also want it to be updated when you get through deployment and you've identified as-builts as well. This is going to be a living design document that we'll review and analyze and make sure that everything makes sense as we move forward. Before we move on to Patty and the reporting requirements, I just want to touch on a couple things that I normally touch on as well. Just back to the phasing. We are defining what the milestone thresholds are for you for each of these categories. We have specific documents that you need to submit for each of those categories as well. When you build your project, we know that in the real world, there are certain areas that need environmental permitting. There are certain areas that have railroad crossings. You have built your project to be deployed across multiple build seasons. What we want to do is we want to try to do the best we can to minimize the amount of expenditure you occur and the money that we give to you, right? We want that to be as aligned as possible so that you're not sitting on money and invoices that we have that are waiting to be held back. So we want to give you the agency and the flexibility to design your phases to hit specific BSL thresholds so that you get paid in a relatively flexible clip so that when you get engineering done, you can pay your engineering contractors for the portion that they work on. So if you have multiple phases, you're going to engineer one year one, engineer part of the phase year two. We don't want to wait till the end of year two before you can get money from us to pay for that engineering. So if you design these phases in a way that works for you and how you want to pay your contractors, we want to give you that flexibility so that you are able to have some ownership in how you get paid from the state through these categories and these individual thresholds. One of the things that I wanted to touch on, and when this guide is released to you, you'll see what all of these individual milestone categories are. We get a lot of questions around pre-deployment activities. A lot of that is before you put a drill in the ground, before you start trenching, is you need to procure or a contract for materials. You need to have a contract for labor. You need to have evidence that you're staged and ready to go. Some of these you may be already into your deployment phase when we start giving you funding for this pre-deployment activity. It's not a serial thing. You can be moving forward with your program, and then we get you disbursement into it. But we realize that a vast majority of your expenses for deployment happen at the beginning. That is your pole attachments, the make ready cost, that is the directional boring. It's much cheaper to put fiber in existing conduit than it is to put new conduit in the ground. And the mechanism that some of these programs have had in the past with milestones is you get paid at the very end when you are fully deployed and you have as-built documentation. We know that's a long time from where the expenses are. So we think this pre-deployment category will help make sure that you have some cash flow to begin those activities and then put less of the burden off of the fiber placement at the end while you're waiting for fiber contractors to do this. You're holding on all this money that needs to go to the directional drill guys or whatever. So again, some of these ideas are that you'll make sure that the cash flow is working as best as possible within reason, again balancing those obligations of states need to be a good steward of the money, what NTIA requires, and again trying to maximize your ability to keep moving forward on this to the best of your ability. One of the things that I do want to call out is we can reimburse all of these milestones that as we move forward and you have the subsequent or the appropriate documentation, with the exception of deployment onwards. You have to have a EHP finding of no effect before you can break ground or initiate any activity. So not just the payment, but you can't even start drilling or doing any ground disturbance activities until you have your EHP finding of no effect. So I just want to make sure that it's very clear. One of the things that I've been tripped up on the past as well is I think of ground disturbing activities as directional drilling, as trenching, but it's made clear to me that something as simple as laying gravel down on an open field to put your staging items together, which is a pre-deployment activity, is something that you can't do or initiate also until you have that finding of no effect. So I want to make sure that when you're getting to that point where you're looking to begin mobilization, that you just check in with WBO if you have any questions about what's allowed and what's not. Most of that should be most likely captured as you start the EHP process earlier. But if you're ever in doubt, we will always make sure we give you the guidance that we have to ensure we don't cross the line on what NTIA is expecting. And we've touched on this in the two previous presentations. Treasury took a very different approach than what NTIA has always taken. NTIA is kind of the standard approach of what's been going on in most of these federal programs. Treasury took a very hands-off approach on environmental. So we don't want to make sure that the expectation should be this is a little bit different here. Again, if there's questions on what you can and can't do, please reach out to us and we'll just make sure that you're in proper compliance. And with that, I will turn it over to Patty. I talk quickly to save you some time and hopefully get to questions at the end of the day. Patty will talk about some additional non-milestone disbursement requirements that are associated with the program.
Great. Thanks, Mitch. You did a great job. I don't have much more to say, just a few slides to go through. So good morning, everybody. My name is Patty Campbell. I'm the Vice President for Grants and Funding Strategies here at CTC. And we do a lot of the post-award monitoring, reporting review, and compliance activities for Wyoming. So we're going to go through a little bit of reporting requirements and a few other things that are required. Morgan, if you can advance, thanks. So reporting overview, we want to talk to you about this a little bit for two reasons. So these are requirements of the NTIA. We have to collect this data because what Chad does is he rolls it up to a report for the NTA about all of the projects. So getting your reports in on time and complete really helps us be successful. And also the other reason is that we monitor throughout the post-award timeframe for success, right? If you're running into problems, if you have problems with permitting, EHP isn't going like you want it to, we can frequently come in and help. And that's our role, is to make you successful, because we want these projects to be successful on time, on budget for you. And a lot of what Mitch said is, we're documenting all of this to get to that point where you're getting your reimbursements in a regular cadence, you're getting your money, everything is flowing. So we're here to help with that. And the reports are what support that process happening. If you were a CPF recipient in the previous iteration of these builds, you're probably used to this. So there are quarterly reports, semi-annual, annual, and then close out when the time comes that you're all done building, documenting, and all that. Semi-annual is a new requirement because the NTA has a semi-annual report requirement for the eligible entity or the state office. So those reports are due in April and October. So we're going to be taking all of the data you give us and rolling it up twice a year to the NTIA to report. All of these reports will be submitted in a GMS, or a grants management system. It's UNA, powered by Amplifund. You may have heard of that if you've operated in other states. But there will be trainings, and pretty much everything will be templated, fill out, all throughout the system. You'll be communicated through the system, and it is a repository of all the documents that you're submitting to us. Next slide, please. In your report, there are specific things that we're going to ask for. Terrestrial and LEO are a little bit different, but basically it's the stuff that we really just need to know. Where are you with the build? What's the progress that you've made? BSL locations, percentages of complete. The way the NTI looks at progress is spend over time. They want to know how much money has been spent on a project and how much completion has been achieved. So looking at this, again, helps us help you get to that point or avoid barriers, roadblocks, things that may happen. And the first few reports, there may be no progress, right? You're not building anything just yet. You haven't been through your EHP process. Maybe your designs aren't fully completed based on that EHP. And again, our whole job in post-award is to support you in getting to the end. Again, templates will be distributed for a lot of these reports. It shouldn't be anything, you've made it through the application process. This should be the good part, right? Actually building this thing a couple years later is really going to be the fun of it all. Quarterly desk reviews are another piece of our post-award monitoring. It could be a 5-minute conversation. It could be a 5-hour conversation, depending on where you are in the process, if you're experiencing problems. And basically, again, it's just a check-in for us to figure out where you are, help you get through things. There's going to be a lot of EHP questions, we know that, and we've got people on staff that can sort of help and advise. We look at financial status as well as deployment milestones. We want to make sure, as Mitch talked a lot about, is match. And I think there's another slide that we'll talk about eligible expenses, but match is the big thing here that the NTA wants us to track. Not that we don't care about how you're spending your money or what you're spending it on. We're just not checking on it with every report and every submission for disbursement reimbursement. So at the bottom it says other areas that will be discussed. So these are the questions that the NTA asks us. What are the obstacles? Because if they're seeing something nationwide, fiber shortages, workforce shortages, other issues, if there was, problems with conduit that, one company manufactured poor conduit or something, or you couldn't get a hold of the size you needed. Those are all reasons to report in and let us know. It's not your fault that the project might be falling behind, but let us know why. So again, the desk reviews are really a conversation. The reports are more numbers and outcome based. Next slide, please. One of the things that we are required to talk about is waste, fraud, and abuse. Basically, we have to tell you that there is a way to report this, and you must report it if you see it in a project. Anything with federal funding, there's another slide that will give you a phone number to call, and these slides will be provided to you. But basically, the reason that we're doing all of this monitoring, that we're auditing and desk reviewing and getting the reports is to fulfill this, that no one is, wasting the government's money. We all went through the benefit of the bargain. Um, I'll keep my opinions to myself about that and wasting some time and money. But, we're really looking at people doing the right thing with the funds because they are public funds. So talking about fraud, waste, and abuse is very important with any federal grant. And most likely in an audit, you will be asked, have you seen any? Do you suspect any on your project or, on any other federally funded project you may be involved with? Next slide. Thank you. Again, talking about fraud, waste, and abuse. The reason that we're monitoring is, this is lying, cheating, misappropriating. No one's going to do that, right? We're sure we've picked great subrecipients, but these are the things that we're looking at to make sure. And the federal government is very serious about this. We all have had training in it. There are additional requirements that we go through. And down at the bottom, you can see that there's a website and a phone number for the Inspector General. So again, if you ever suspect fraud, waste, or abuse in a project, please report it. Please let us know. All right. Post-award requirements. So what else do we have to do? There's meetings, there's reporting. Next slide, please, Morgan. Just going to talk about a couple of things. Eligible program expenses. So again, if you've been through CPF, you've been through this process as far as what is an eligible expense, what you can spend money on that counts towards match or that is appropriate for a project. These 7 things are all the high level categories of things that can be deemed eligible. And again, as Mitch said, we're not going to look at your receipts. We're not going to look at your expenses unless there are problems or issues. So we have the right to ask for them. The NTA has the right to ask for that level of documentation. We don't want to ask for that level of documentation. It will probably be reviewed in your audit that you have to have annually. We'll talk about that in a minute. But we just want to get documentation of match. So every time, as Mitch had said, there's a milestone disbursement submitted for funding, you have to provide evidence of match. And again, there's a form to fill out. There's pretty clear instructions. I believe we'll be doing another webinar on that specifically. Mitch, I'm not sure if that's a full webinar, but probably with the grants management system training, we'll talk about, how to upload evidence of match and what that really means. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So again, you need to keep your receipts. You need to not commingle project funds, everything that the federal government requires. But again, we won't be requesting that with every disbursement reimbursement request. Next slide, please. Yes, the audit. So as many of you are commercial companies or for-profit entities, you probably haven't gone through an audit. Maybe it's not your business practice, you haven't needed to, you've never received $1 million in federal funds before. Well, that's all going to change. So an audit is required one way or another if you expend $1 million in your fiscal year. Now, the $1 million is an aggregate of all of the federal funds. So if you've got CPF funding or if you have another federal program and you're getting BEAD money, if that totals $1 million in your fiscal year, an audit is going to be required. If in this, this current fiscal year, if you spend $900,000, no audit. If you spend $1 million, again, in the aggregate federal money that comes in and is spent, then you have to go through an audit process. And then this flow chart just kind of goes through, if you don't spend $1 million, no audit required. If you do spend $1 million, and if BEAD is your only source of federal funds, or if you have an aggregate of additional federal funds, the process that you need to follow. The audit is something that you have to engage a third-party auditor to do. There are specific timelines of when it has to be submitted. And you do have to submit it to the state for review. So it's something that you need to get ahead of and contract with an auditor, depending on when your fiscal year ends. I believe it's 6 months from the end date of your fiscal year is when you need to submit it. Again, no surprises, if you have concerns or if any issues, that's what the desk reviews are for, to talk about, to ask questions, to figure out what you need to do. Auditors will be very familiar with this process. I will say that it is an expense. It's an expense you're going to incur, but it is a grant eligible expense. And there probably will be questions about that. And then record retention. So this is another requirement of any federal grant. You must keep all your records related to each project grant award for 3 years after the project end period. So that means 3 years after you close out, file everything, and get your last check, you've got to retain those records for 3 years, and they have to be accessible to the Wyoming Broadband Office, the NTIA, and the OIG. Just in case there are allegations or issues or whatever, these have to be available. They can be electronic, they can be paper copies. And I believe in the guide, we provide a list of what you should keep in your records. And it's pretty exhaustive as far as, all your application documents, emails back and forth, certainly all of your reports, all of your disbursement requests, all of your receipts and documentation for things that you purchased. And again, in the guide that I think will be released soon, which is it's a great reference tool for you for all of these things. So I encourage you, not to read it cover to cover, but become familiar with it and use it as a reference document. Again, 3 years after the project ends, and for Leo grants, that's 10 years plus 3. So that's a long time. If you can go back one, I'm sorry, Morgan, it's just the bottom, the record retention requirement for real property, equipment, or facilities. So there is a UCC1 filing that needs to occur. And what that is, it's sort of like a lien on a house, if you're not familiar. It's something that you have to document that the federal government has an interest in your project at 75% if you have 25% match. They have 75% of an interest, which means an ownership position in your project, which means you can't sell it or lease it out to someone else without their explicit approval. I think that is the last. There's a slide that these are some of the reference documents. And if you don't know, the NTIA is, every now and again drops some new guidance to us. We're still waiting for a lot of the guidance of what the reporting requirements are going to be finalized as. So if we don't have all the answers, it's because the NTA hasn't provided some of them, but we're getting guidance and FAQs and things, weekly, I would say, with the promise of more to come.
That's right. And so there's a couple of resources. There's the federal resources, and then the state of Wyoming will house a ongoing FAQ as well as our program guide that we'll publish shortly. We're waiting to wrap up a couple pieces. And I think I mentioned on a previous call, once it is published on the website or any of these things become live, there'll be a email blast that goes out to all of the subrecipients or prospective awardees of things that have been updated, so they're aware and can start digging in. A lot of the materials we've been talking about over the last several webinars are going to be provided in lots of detail, specifically in those guides or that information. And so as questions come up on these calls, and we will, do our best to answer them here, and there will be a couple we'll get to shortly, but we will also make sure that a final formal answer is put in these FAQs, and that will be the source of truth from our perspective, as opposed to things that Patty and I say or fumble around sometimes on these calls. We'll just make sure that they are clarified correctly as part of that FAQ document. And then on the next slide, I think it does mention that if there are questions, specifically general inquiries, we have Chad's email address for this to go out to as well. Should we have additional, information of where you should send emails to, we'll publish that as well. But for now, we all know Chad. You can send him some information. We'll make sure we process through those standard channels. I think with that, I can move on to some of these questions that are here. And I'm going to go in reverse order because we just got, well, maybe not exactly reverse order. I'll take it from the top now, and we'll go back, take them one at a time. So I talked a little bit kind of quickly maybe through the project phasing component. I want to spend a little bit more talking about that specifically, and maybe how it kind of relates to somebody that took advantage of the kind of informal process we had in CPF. So let's talk. I guess I'll read the question out, then I'll kind of answer it, and I'll maybe do two of them. But to clarify, the project plan is all inclusive of the entire project, and that would outline any phases that were desired to best facilitate the build and payment. Once you get through permitting and engineering, we narrow down these specific phases and the milestones with each of those phases. Is that an accurate statement? So first part is accurate. What we want to do is, in your application for each of your sub-grant awards, you have a entire project that you've outlined of what you're going to do. That is infrastructure routes, technology types, BSLs associated with all of those items. What we want to get from you in the project plan phase is discrete breakouts of what pieces of infrastructure and what number of BSLs are associated with each of those things. And this will allow us, what we found in CPF is having you get through all of your permitting and engineering to get paid was kind of a pain point for a lot of our providers, because you get one or two sticky items that needed to be re-engineered or a couple permits that wouldn't come through, and then you're sitting on all of this money. So having 20, 40, 60, 80, 100 thresholds of BSLs to get through allows you to carve out the way you want to specific sets of infrastructure and BSLs that you're going to get through in a given build season. So you can, maybe your first phase is the a high density area of BSL, so you are putting less infrastructure in the ground, turning up more people, getting more percentage of money for the amount of work you're going into. You may know you have a couple very difficult railroad crossing permits in a piece. You may want to make that phase 4 and make that a relatively small phase, so that as you move through the project, you're not going to get your permitting done till build year 2. You might want to put that in the back. And so when you're ready to kind of move on that, you'll have all the permitting and the requirements that you need. So I think what we're looking for from you is, in the project plan, you take your overall project design. We want you to break it into those phases, similar to what some folks did in CPF, and then assign infrastructure and BSLs to that. We're asking for you to think through that logically, so that you are mindful of those standard thresholds that we have of 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. And so when you build these things out for us, we want your subsequent submission of documentation to come in align with the phases that you intended to do. So when you submit your engineering for, say you define phase 1 as 32 miles and 46 locations, we want to see your design documentation and permitting for those 46 locations and 32 miles, right? And so that will help us align your submissions, quickly get through the disbursement. You get to tell us what those phases are going to be like. And when you submit them as part of your milestone, if you have a phase that is 10% and a phase that's 12%, you submit them in, we'll get you 20% of whatever that milestone is. If you have a single phase that is 47%, you're eligible to get 47% of your total when you submit in that phase. So how you get to those phases is more about how you want to do that. As long as we understand them and what's associated with them and what materials we expect to see come in to support that disbursement request, submission, and approval, we'll be able to move through those very quickly. The whole idea of the permitting is of the phasing is to allow you some flexibility and not having to get stuck on specific items to make sure you're able to get paid. A good example is, say you have 4 different phases and something goes wrong in phase 2, you might be able to do phase 1 plus phase 3 as a way to get over individual threshold and get access to that payment. And so we can do additional TA as needed on that, but what we really want to do is give you the agency to define how you're going to tie infrastructure and expenses to specific BSLs, so that when we get to the point of disbursement and those individual milestone requirements, we can tie what we're looking at for your evidence and your documentation to those specific things. That's ultimately what we're looking to do. Again, it's an optional step for some of you with smaller projects that don't need to do that or don't want to do that. You can just have a singular phase through the life of this, but it will help the cash flow if you are mindful of some of these things that you're going to run into that might affect when you're able to get some of these deliverables done. Jumping into the second question, can you explain phasing further? When breaking locations into phasing, are we giving you a number of locations that are covered in the phase to receive the disbursement for each milestone? Or are we breaking these locations into groups and assigning a specific amount of funds to request disbursement on the percentage of locations for a milestone disbursement? So circling back, the way you described it was the second piece was exactly what we did in CPF. For some of those things, we broke into phases. We assigned a certain amount of funds to them. In this case, you are getting disbursement on percentage of BSLs that you have met that milestone for. So you phase a specific set of milestones and all the work associated with it to those defined areas. And whether you submit one for 42% because it covers that number of BSLs, or several that add up to over that threshold, that's how you get paid. So it is specific BSLs tied to specific work you're doing, but it has nothing to do with funding. Once you achieve X percent of BSLs, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, you get that percentage or sub percentage of payment for those. And so how you get to those thresholds, we don't care. But what we need for you to do is define those phases so we understand what's coming in and we can quickly review and process that disbursement. Moving on to the next question. How do audit requirements apply for profit entities? 2 CFR 200 calls out non-federal entities, but that definition does not traditionally include for-profit entities.
So an annual audit is required to be submitted to the state. 2 CFR 200 calls that out for the eligible entity or the recipient. So subrecipients have a little bit of a different reporting requirement, and the state has supported this, that an annual audit is required. NTIA state, it's part of this program. I will say also that you probably all had to submit audits to get to this point. And if you do not have financial audits that are of the last year, we probably will be reaching out and asking for them, just as a requirement.
Next, do you have any more, Patty, or should I move on to the next one?
No, I was just going into the next question, yeah.
Okay, cool. So on this next one specifically, when you say we cannot sell or lease projects, does that mean you cannot lease dark fiber or conduit in the BEAD areas?
Yeah, so no, I apologize if that was confusing. You can't sell off the asset. You can't transfer ownership. You can't make money from selling the asset off. But of course, we want you to lease the conduit. We want you to sell dark fiber. We want to do all that. That's the purpose of this whole program. But yeah, you just can't sell off the asset. You can't sell it and make $100 million because the federal government has an interest that depreciates over those 10 years. So in 10 years, all yours.
Thank you, Patty.
Sure.
For ISPs that have been awarded more than one sub-project area, do we have to submit multiple reports per sub-project, or will we report one, or will one report be able to cover updates on all award sub-project areas? Okay, so a little, let me take a stab at this, Patty, then you correct me where I go wrong, is in our final proposal, we have, so one contractor, you have multiple awards that win in final proposal. So you bid on area 32, 24, and 16, and you won those ones. Those are 3 individual subawards, which loosely called projects, right? You may have 3 individual contracts with WBO for those at the end of the day, but you have to report separately on each of those items. If it's gone into the final proposal, the FIPFR is finalized with individual projects for the NTIA to see, we have to report on those level of projects that have gone to NTIA. So if you have 3 subawards that were made for you, there's 3 different reports that have to go in, because there is back to you, Patty, like commingling of funds and certain things. Now we have a different approach for disbursement and things here. Don't want to conflate that. But if we told the NTIA we have 3 different subgrant awards of different amounts, the reporting and the effort has to be tied to what has gone into that document to the NTIA.
Correct. And that all talks about, Mitch, what you talked about in the beginning, as far as, having appropriate accounting systems in place to not commingle funds across projects. We know you're going to buy bulk fiber. We know you're going to buy bulk things. You just have to be able to allocate it to each project in proportionality to what you're using. I will say, though, for the desk reviews and things like that, those will probably be on a per company or per subrecipient basis. We want to talk to you about all of the projects because you're going to have a lot of the same experiences with them. There'll be some one-offs with the difficulty depending on where they are, but I think, one talk rather than 3 or 14 or 12 makes sense. As long as it's the same project team, the same folks are in charge, we'll meet with you and talk about all of the projects as a whole. No need to have 12 conversations.
Moving on to the next one, how do milestone disbursement schedules account for delays with federal land authorizations, tribal coordination, historic preservation? When do those items that are outside of your direct control? So I'll take a stab, and then Patty, again, keep me honest here. When you outline sort of what your project phasing is going to be in that timeline document is the project plan submission, and you give us your anticipated milestone, disbursement request dates, that doesn't have to be set in stone. You may move faster than you anticipated. There may be delays. We're not out of our compliance by not meeting those times. We want to know when you expect certain things so that we're prepared for it. That's at a high level of how we're tracking against those things. If you get to a point where we thought we were going to have the first engineering milestones in September of this year come in, and you found that something has held that up and it's moved further back, we just want to know. We'll adjust the schedule, send us something, we'll track towards that. Like, it's not the thing that we care about is getting this program done within 4 years and in the NTI guideline incorrectly. How we get there along the way, we want to understand the process and where we're going to a level that we can then feel good about getting done in 4 years. But we're not going to have you live or die by those first stabs in that project plan document. We understand that things change. How do milestone disbursement schedules account for delays? So with federal land authorization, travel coordination, I think what we want to see in that too is when you're putting your project plan together, right? You said it's a project plan of how long you think permitting is going to take, environmental permitting. I think we should see a lot of that reflected in your proposed permits and what you expect on that as well. I mean, if you don't think you're going to have any environmental, that's a flag for us during the project plan phase to say, hey, let's talk about this a little bit and make sure you have what you're going to need to know. We have a rough idea on how long we think some of these things are going to take. And if they don't make sense to us, we'll ask you questions, you'll clarify, and we'll either agree with you or we'll say, hey, you might not have thought about this BLM thing that we're hearing. Most people are saying it's taking them a year. You think you're going to get it in 2 months. Is that true or not? I guess we only have 3 more minutes to go, so I'm going to try to get through these quickly. But conveying to us throughout the process what your holdups are will help us find a way to work with agencies to help alleviate these pains and make sure that we're not counting them against you. We know there are things like permitting, pull attachments, various requirements that will be out of your direct control. By letting us know what those things are, we can best suit and support you throughout the process. And then there was one last question that maybe was answered or I missed it, but we can always put all these things in FAQs or have a follow-up. If there's any questions that you've thought of after this call specifically, please send them into Chad via that email. And what we'll do is make sure they get a formal response to you for all of these things, as well as put in the FAQ.
Yeah, thank you, Mitch. And apologies, we do have a hard stop here in 2 minutes, but I appreciate everyone taking the time to join us today. If there's any questions that you did not get an opportunity to ask, reach out to me directly, my email address. Most of you have my email address, but if you don't, we'll send it out in this deck. If there's anything I'm missing, please let me know. We're here to help. We want to help guide you through this process. And we look forward to seeing you, encourage you to join our next webinar on Friday I believe it's from 1 to 2 p.m. To go through the portal that we're developing for the BEAD process. But again, we look forward to seeing you then. Have a great day, everyone, and we will talk to everyone soon. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye.
Thanks, Chad. Bye.